Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
It is exciting to be on, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So I'm looking forward to this, and literally we've just spent like 7, 8 minutes on the preamble and realizing that I'm getting more and more excited about this conversation. So I think we're just going to jump right in with Michael. Where are you at now? What are you currently doing, and how did you get here?
So I am in Denver, Colorado. I got here by car from St. Louis. No, I know that's not what you're going for. Um, I I've got a few companies in podcasting and audio production, mostly around the business side of that, around marketing them. The original company there is called Call for Content. And then we're now spinning out Podcast 360, Podcast Score, and a couple other brands that I'm looking forward to talking more about. And that is headed up as officially under my organization. We call that GOT Audio. GOT stands for Gentlemen of Technology, which is sort of the mothership. And well, I am the Gentleman of Technology.
That is an awesome title. And now that I know that it's taken, I clearly can't be the gentleman of technology. So I'm going to have to come up with my own.
You can be a gentleman of technology, but I get to be the OG, the original gentleman in this case.
I like it. So how did you start getting involved with everything to do with podcasts?
I was consulting. I was doing B2B growth strategy consulting for digital services and SaaS. And this was maybe 5-6 years ago. I started consulting with a B2B podcast network, and they had me develop a new website for them and a go-to-market strategy for a national expansion. They didn't like the strategy I put together. They decided it was too digital and not human enough. So I got to keep it, and the non-compete ran out, and then I started Call for Content.
This is fantastic. Literally with your blueprint already sort of exactly how you would go about doing it.
Yep, exactly. And so we started with B2B content marketing and then learned more and more about podcasting and expanded out from there. And I really fell in love with podcasting because of the efficiency that it could produce in a content creation system. Because the depth of content, the amount of knowledge that we get out of this conversation is way more, way faster than any sort of written option.
So I'm a massive fan, and I'm thinking that you're going down towards the idea of repurposing content on the basis of one podcast is just a mammoth. You know, you could write a book from some of the conversations I've had on podcasts.
I have written books off of conversations from podcasts.
Player.
Likely do it again. I do all of my written content. All the content we produce as a company goes outline, assuming it's audio, record audio for first draft, transcribe, and then create content. So there's never a time when we don't use audio as the first step in actual content creation after outline.
So that's really interesting. Can you talk us through why you do it that way? Is it something that started because you were doing podcasts and you realized the system was really good, or is it for another reason?
So I was doing podcast stuff, and at the same time, I learned about a company that has since rebranded itself, but at the time was known as Book in a Box. And they had just put out the first edition of their book called The Book in the Box Method. And it was outline your book, interview yourself, use that recording as your first draft. And so when I saw that, and I knew what we were doing in repurposing with podcasting, and then I saw how cheap it was getting to transcribe, because when I started, it was still $1 a minute to transcribe. And now it's free. And so that's a pretty big change.
I remember those days of starting to rack up some serious cash using these different apps and sort of looking at it going, I got to really make this content worthwhile from this. I've spent too much money to transcribe a 45-minute conversation. I got to do something with it.
And that was kind of my starting point, was it is worthwhile to transcribe if we're not just making a podcast episode. It's not worthwhile if we are.
That's interesting. So again, massive fan of the repurposing idea in the first place. But obviously by recording your first draft, you can actually be creating podcast content at the same time.
Yep. And that is
that's
what we do when we record a podcast or when we develop one.
So
Now,
I think this is awesome because we're constantly telling people, you know, the worst thing you can do is write a blog, post it, publish it, share it on social media, and then forget about it. And actually, you know, we've done a lot of testing on our podcast, and I think we're recording this. This is going to be like episode 100 and something, which is awesome, and I'm excited to have made it this far. But we've done even the reverse. We've taken some of the old blogs that we've written, we've taken some of the personal blogs that we've written in the past, and literally just read them out and had a conversation around them, or literally just sort of talk about the exact same thing. And I think this idea of actually starting with the audio is kind of similar. We've been doing this a lot as an agency with some clients. We've actually been recording really short videos with our clients. And literally all it is us asking them questions and letting them talk and being themselves, getting them relaxed, and then basically just sort of getting information out of them slowly but surely. And
I love
invariably
that.
well, it's the same idea, right? So suddenly
Oh,
you're
whoa.
interviewing.
We're redeveloping a podcast process that I'm about to launch my first show on for a daily podcast. Single question, single answer. And so you're aware when I talk about like recording audio, and I call it audio first content marketing. The process we go through is, there we go. Record audio. Well, plan an outline, record as audio with video. Key point there. Transcribe to text, repurpose to all three. And so you plan with text, record with video, and then you strip out the audio and the text when you transcribe. And now suddenly you've got everything to repurpose. The issue is most people don't keep it in a good knowledge base. And we've used just autonomous voices, just robo voice on old blog posts just to create podcasts, and that does improve search. We've got, I think we get 100 to 200 people visiting the site each week or each month who just come to listen to the little robo clips of our episodes.
I think this is awesome. And again, like it's flipping everything on its head. I have a lot of these conversations, right? Podcasting, you do too, I'm sure. The thing that I love the most is that when I get an email sort of from someone going, so what sort of questions are you going to ask me? I was like, I don't know. Like I want it to be a conversation, right? I have no idea. I don't really, you know, for a plan and an outline, I usually look at somebody's experience, what they're currently doing. That's about as far as I'll take it because I want to see how the conversation develops. And I
Yeah.
think that actually people don't realize is that when they start talking to a video, and again, you know, the simplest of tools, if you own a smartphone, you can hold it up, you can click record, and suddenly you've got content, which is you talking naturally about your product, about your service, getting excited about certain things that you don't necessarily realize you're excited about. And what comes out of that is the real you, the real reason the company exists, the real reason that you're excited to do this every day as a job, as why you started the business in the first place. And that's always really much more interesting for clients to kind of get that realization as they kind of see themselves from the exterior, rather than if you said to them, right, what would you write a blog about? And invariably they'll go, oh, write a blog. I don't know. I'll write it about the latest product or what's happening in my industry. And
See,
again,
that's,
it's really interesting how that works, isn't it?
yeah, I can write big stuff. And like I'm working on a book. I can make progress on that over time, but that's outline, narrate, dictate, clean up. That's my cycle every time. It takes a while. Get a lot done, but might get 10 new pages, but it might take me a week or two to get it done. And I'm busy. But for daily content, my team just feeds me the question and now I'm all set up. So I just sit down beginning of my day, hit record, answer the question. They process it, they get it out. that's ideal from end to end. Just from a knowledge capture standpoint, it's so much easier when you've got them in those single snippets.
Do you think that we're going to go more towards sort of a micro podcasting kind of environment where, you know, those short, snappy kind of episodes that people can consume pretty quickly, easily, then move on to something else?
I think we're going to see a divide. I think we're going to see people move away from the middle length show. I think the 30-minute interview show in particular is probably going to die, because I know they're either going to have to go long so they can go deeper, or they're going to end up moving to a short format where they can really focus it in on the 1 or 2 bits of info that are useful.
So I'm actually a 45 to 49 minute interview show, so I think I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Quick, write down, change strategy, and start that tomorrow.
Maybe move to the 2-3 hour format. Go full Joe Rogan on it.
Right, here we go, Michael. Well done. Take a seat, get a brew. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'd come back for that show.
Well, to be fair though, so it is really interesting. It's always a case of I try and put myself in the position of the audience, right? So what we were really trying to do with this show is to try and help small, mid-sized businesses to actually sort of do something and to make a difference within their business through their marketing. And the reality is I find myself having to catch myself out sometimes. So I just did a recording a couple of days ago with somebody who's working in blockchain DLT for the marketing sector. Now, I've been working with businesses in DLT since 2017, so I got really geeky and super excited, and then have to kind of remind myself, this isn't my personal conversation, right? I'm not Seth Rogen yet. I say yet very optimistically, but the idea is actually you've got to come back to that idea of who your audience is and what they want. So we kind of do a mix of very short, 8 to 10 minute episode max, talking about one thing in particular. And then we move on to the idea of having a guest and having a conversation that hopefully stays interesting for long enough, and then it basically gets cut off when I think we've done enough and we're probably actually upsetting people or boring them by now. Not the case so far in this conversation, obviously.
I think that's a good model, and that's similar to what we're moving to or running for most of our internal shows are either very short or we're moving to that mixed format model where we've got one show I just acquired where I think it's going to be probably an hour to 2 hour show on the main episode. And then we'll probably do anywhere from 15-minute to 1 hour commentary and summaries surrounding that each week.
I like this as well because it's another thing that we don't always think about straight away. So if somebody is doing a podcast and if the episodes are extremely long, there isn't nothing basically stopping them from creating the condensed version of the show, right?
That Blinkist actually just launched that. They're calling them shortcasts, and they picked out some of the most popular podcasts and they made 15-minute or less versions.
Damn you, Blinkist. But it's a great idea, right? Even if it's not necessarily on a third-party platform or anything else, but even within your own website, even within what you're doing, even creating a secondary version to see if people prefer that short, snappy kind of content. Again, as digital marketers, at the end of the day, everything we do really is about testing, right?
Definitely. I mean, testing and measuring. I'd say if you don't measure
the measuring.
Yeah. That's a very common mistake I see marketers make.
Well, to be fair, it's usually one of the two extremes, right? It's no measuring, or it's literally relying purely and solely on the data as it sort of stands in black and white and not necessarily realizing there's a human element in between at some point. But okay, so Podcast 360, because you've got your awesome background with all your branding and everything set up. And I am liking this.
I go on video shows now. These weren't a thing the last time I did a major podcast tour like 2 years ago.
Well, we're all changing. I haven't got a green screen or anything like that, so I'm just in my little office cracking away. But the thing that's interesting is that more and more people are coming onto podcasts, and we're obviously seeing a huge divide in terms of people talking about is it too crowded as a space to actually start something, or whether or not there's a huge amount of opportunities in podcasts. So I have no doubts on where you stand for obvious reasons. But can you talk people through a little bit why actually it could be a really good time to start a podcast?
Okay, so you don't want to start a podcast because blogs are a less crowded space?
Blogs are a massively crowded space, but for me, I'll be honest with you, I'm finding that everything in digital marketing right now, whether it be SEO, social media, pay-per-click search, it doesn't matter. Everything is becoming crowded. It's becoming easier for content to be created, and therefore we're constantly in a battle, right?
Yeah.
We started the podcast as an agency. We started it as an experiment. We said, can we launch a podcast within 30 days, and with content, with guests, with all sorts of things? And we just sort of set about doing it as an agency. So we flicked everything online within a month. That was 15, 16 months ago. We're now 100 episodes down the line, some 15, 16,000 downloads later, or whatever it is. And again, it's not a huge show. We haven't built, the Seth Rogen style audience, but we get messages on a pretty much weekly or every fortnight. We'll get messages from people that have listened, people that have heard something, people that want to talk about something that they talked about on the show. And I think that's really useful. We wanted to do it because I actually really enjoy it now. Now I can't imagine the idea of having a week where I don't actually have a conversation with somebody cool. I'm meeting tons of people from within the industry across the globe. And literally, it's a hugely rewarding experience for me as well. Like, being completely honest, I'm hoping it helps everyone listening. There's a little bit of selfish about this. I'm doing it because it's really good for me as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about just starting another show called People I Meet and then doing all my calls on air.
My commercial director has been recording. He basically set up a challenge at the beginning of the year. The goal was simple. He wanted to have coffee with 100 people from within his network that he hadn't met properly. Obviously, COVID, one thing another. So he changed that to, I want to have 100 Zoom coffees over the course of this year. And he's basically just started recording them, asking obviously permission. Don't start recording people dodgily. That's just weird. But he started recording them. And again, we've spoken a couple of times now, and I'm like, it's the perfect kind of content. Take one section in particular, start asking a regular question, which I know he does already. And literally he's built up this huge backlog or back catalog almost, that if he wants to do it as a show, bang, you've already got some 30, 40 shows already recorded.
And I mean, I think that's ideal. Like I'm trying to get more content moving for myself. And so in order to do that, I mean, I'm sure you're in the same position. When you're busy, you want to get a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 wherever you can.
If you can get a 3-for-1, you're really, really winning. 2-for-1, happy days.
Podcast, get to meet somebody new, handle my networking, get the episode recorded so I've got podcast content, get it transcribed, make a blog, social. That's my 3. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I'll give it a 3 for today.
But I think it's awesome, right? Because it's exactly the idea of repurposing and, more importantly, creating content in a smart way.
And to layer it up, so let's say, I don't know, you're a small agency owner or a coach or some other B2B service provider, because I really like B2B services. They're the easiest way to make a living, in my opinion. The starting point is, okay, let's say we're going to have a podcast. Let's say end of this year, we want a book done too. So we want a podcast now, and we want a book, and we want to get a blog going, but the podcast is going to take care of the blog and the social. So if we want a book done at the end of this year, well, what's the book going to be about? Okay, let's break down the book, outline the book. Let's look at our podcast calendar for the year. Where can we slot in the interviews to the podcast that are going to create the content for the book? Well, they all need to be in the first 6 months of the year. Okay, the first 2 seasons, the first 2 quarters of the podcast, we're going to spend talking about part A and part B, the 2 parts of the book. We're going to interview 10 experts for each. each one of those experts is now going to become part of our promotional strategy for the book launch, because we're going to feature every single one of them in the book. And we're going to get all of it done in half the time. That's a good system to me. You set that up. We do that on a quarterly basis with ebooks pretty regularly.
I think that's a huge, huge win for so many people. And it's, I'll be honest. So back in February, I actually took, I think by that point we had about 10 or 11 guest interviews, and I printed out the transcripts and just took a pen. I was I was actually stuck in France for the first lockdown. And I basically just started sitting there highlighting, scribbling some notes next to it, finding the key concepts from each of these sections or each of these interviews. And my goal was exactly what you just said, right? You've now got 10 incredible chapters talking about really specific things within digital marketing with people who are remarkably well known within their sectors for having what they've done and what they've built, and literally sat there going, that's your book copy. In fact, I've got it in the cupboard behind me. So I'm going to have to dig that back out now. And I think actually finish that last bit, which is pulling it together to write it as a book.
I mean, I think that's when you give it to somebody else.
Yeah, I need somebody else. You know anyone good?
Not anymore, actually. That's kind of the problem. I'm doing mine myself because all the good people I know, they stay booked up all year round, and I'm too lazy and too cheap to put down the $15,000 deposit to get a good book written in 6 months.
Well, a good writer commands good money.
Yeah. Podcast book writer. If anybody wants to start that agency, give me a call. We'll white label all the podcast stuff for you.
I love it. There you go. So if anyone right now is thinking, what should I do next? You've got somebody to reach out to. Just talk to Michael. He'll get you set up. And before you know it, you'll be running a podcast book agency.
Yeah. I mean, servicing other agencies has been a big part of our business. And it's kind of how we got to the productized service that is Podcast 360 now. Was we white labeled for other agencies. They needed a system where we would never have to speak with the client so they could really own the relationship. And that system got more and more systematized until it was pretty much a factory assembly line. And at that point, we were redoing everything in ClickUp, moving to ClickUp. And we said, oh, we've got 2 clicks and we can have a new one up and running now. Well, let's make this thing. And it turned into Podcast 360, all just because we were white labeling to other agencies already.
So I think this is, again, going to go off on a different tangent for a little while, but it's the systemizing the system you just said. And I think this is huge for anyone listening, regardless of industry, niche, business, sector, anything, it doesn't matter. But that idea of creating a system, and we've already talked in depth about, podcasts, transcription, blog content, that becomes a system, right? And it's almost automated other than a few human elements that are required to clean up content or write your introduction or whatever you want to do. But the reality is, when you start creating these systems and you put them in place, things do become like the factory line, right? That you create that production line whereby there are no questions, there are no ifs or buts, there are no procrastinating about whether you should take a photo of your cat to post on your social media platforms or whatever else. You know what you're doing because, you sit down, you've recorded the podcast, that becomes your content schedule for the next week, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it might be. And I think, can you talk a little bit more about how you identify where the opportunities are for systemization, and then how you've actually systemized some of the marketing and some of these ideas, how they came to be?
Yeah. So if we do it more than once, we're going to systemize it. If we think we're going to do it more than once, we're going to write and document an SOP while we're doing it the first time, just in case. We expect anywhere from 2 to 5 drafts on most of our processes and systems before we get them to somewhere that's really solidified. And we always start with input and output. So what are we getting in? What do we need out? What steps do we take in between? I think the big thing is doing it by time and doing it by automatability. And so when we look at a task, most of my team has some sort of basic computer automation knowledge with Zapier and with maybe writing a little bit of code, that sort of thing. And we're really big on cross training and educating for those so that it is easy for them to identify this is something that somebody could automate. And if that is the case, then we've got a process to feed it in to more experienced automators and operators who can then say, yes, we can do that. This is how we do it. This is about how long it would take. And then, is this worth doing? Being the final question. Is the cost benefit there yet?
The tools like Zapier and If This Then That are hugely powerful for anyone who's beginning at this automation stuff. And I think that's really important. You know, most people don't realize how many little things you can automate. And
Everything.
that's the dream right there, Michael. You're setting the dream. You want to automate everything. But
We
even with the
actually
most
produce a show for a client, and that's his dream, is just they're an automation agency. All they do is automate and integrate products.
that's
And
amazing.
that's all he does all day. So
To
yeah,
be
I
fair
love
though,
it.
this is huge, right? Because people don't necessarily realize. You mentioned one earlier. If you're recording things like this on Zoom and you want a transcription, you can have this connected directly to your Otter account.
Yep.
Now that sounds super simple, and when people go, "Oh, well, I've never thought about doing that or anything else," but actually, you don't know. Well, you no longer need to take your recording files and then put them across, and then put that into the Otter thing and wait for the upload, and then once that's done, it's just done for you. So any little things that you can do like that are huge time savers in the end of the day.
Well, what we can do is we can do Zoom to Otter to Dropbox, all as part of the same system, and then have a Zapier trigger from the Dropbox and let us know or pull those files into the next part of the system automatically.
I like that. So where does the transcription go next? I'm trying to dig into your system now. I'm not trying to
ClickUp.
make you. Sorry?
ClickUp.
Okay.
So everything goes into ClickUp for us. I love it. Never going to leave it. It's better than all the others. And I'll fight you for it.
I'm not that attached to any tools that I'd ever fight somebody about it. So I'm okay with that.
We moved to ClickUp and then started the unofficial ClickUp podcast because we loved ClickUp so much.
Wow. That's the way to do it. You're the raving fans that push the business forward.
Yeah. I mean, and the 35 million they just raised is probably helping.
So
So
from ClickUp, obviously, you've then got multiple tasks and multiple other parts of it that then start to happen. But the idea being at some point, obviously, what you're trying to do is get, like you said, input, the podcast going in, and then output, which I'm guessing is things like your blog articles, your social posts, and everything else that goes around it.
yeah, so it inputs to ClickUp, and then from there, it gets assigned to different team members. Going to get an audio editor to handle the editing. And then they're also going, while they're editing it, they're going to tag some of the best quotes in the episode so that somebody can go through, once it's been edited, write the show notes, and create, using Headliner, the videos for the episode.
And then at the end, you've got an amass of finished content, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and then we put it on a content calendar, also in ClickUp, and we schedule it, and it all goes out.
Beautiful thing right there. Beautiful thing. That's a system that sounds like it's been perfected over time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we've been doing this for 5 years or other. It's not like we get paid by other people to do it for their clients, which I feel there's a level of trust involved when somebody is willing to put their name on your service, that that that's a real hallmark for us, that when customers do that.
To be fair, that basically, again, you're putting your reputation on the line to promote somebody else or to use somebody else, to reliably deliver. That's a huge step. So, and if that's the case, then, hashtag winning.
Exactly. Um but it gives us a lot of opportunity because we've got a system in place and we can tweak it. So for example, we're looking at a single person self-serve option where we can handle some stuff, but they really don't want a team involved in, say, the editing of the show for a faster turnaround time. Then we'd use a tool like Descript that does most of the editing for them. And we can really speed up our time to completion if it's a single speaker using something like Descript. But
So,
for a multi-speaker show, that isn't nearly as effective.
well, I was going to ask you. So again, this idea of single person or guest kind of shows, there's a lot to be said. When we first started, we did it all internally. So we're a small team. We've got 4 people. We all jumped on. And I think our very first call was basically us talking about what are we going to call this podcast. And the idea was really simple, right? You pull people in from what you know and who you know and your own network and everything else. But we always had the idea of we wanted it to be a guest a week and then take it from there. But for people out there, how, if you're in your industry and you've been in your industry for a while, and if you're trying to build your own business, your own network, your own profile, creating a podcast where you can talk authoritatively about your subject is a really great way to try and promote yourself as well as your business, right?
Yes. And I'd say it is generally better to do a show where you interview people.
Why?
It's a lot easier.
Okay.
That's probably the biggest reason. It's just easier to keep a show flowing, to keep the conversation going, to have guests on every week instead of having topics necessarily that you need to talk about. Those all make it a lot easier. And I think the show has a natural promotion cycle built in because you have guests on. Whereas the single speaker show is probably better for content production if you're going for video or text as your end content forms. And it's probably a little easier to get launched quickly because you don't have to schedule with people, but it's definitely a harder show to keep going.
Again, what you mentioned there about scheduling and stuff as well, like we've automated that now pretty much.
Oh,
Like the
yeah.
only part I do is screen whether or not they feel like a good fit. And if they do, they get sent a link and that's it. That's me out the process until I jump on the call ready to go.
I do the same thing. I couldn't record interview shows if I did it any other way.
But it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about, right? So services like we use Calendly. I don't know what you
Same.
use. Same. So I know some clients of ours that use Acuity, which seems to do pretty much the same thing. I haven't really played with it,
It
but the idea
does.
being, it's so simple, right? You give somebody a link, they book in a time that fits in with your calendar, and that's synced with my Google Calendar, and basically from there, it's all taken care of. It creates the calendar event. It invites them to it. It creates the Zoom call that we're going to be jumping on. And I have nothing to do other than click on Zoom and basically open the call at the time that my calendar tells me to.
It really is a much easier system. And if you're using something like, say, a ClickUp or an Asana or something like that to do your guest management, because we keep all the guests that have applied in somewhere, you can actually set it up so that when they book with the link, they get moved to the next stage. So you can have your whole pipeline and schedule all listed out in something like that as well.
Again, I'm all for automation. We've been playing with Notion for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. This year's gone by so quickly, I can't really figure out how long it's been. But have you had a chance to play with Notion?
Yeah, so it's funny that you bring up Notion because I don't know anyone who's chosen Notion after experiencing ClickUp.
So we haven't tried ClickUp yet, and that's going to be something that I'm going to end up going away and playing with. And then basically I'll probably send you an email saying, yeah, right, Michael, you were right. Well done. But for us, we moved actually from like an Asana-based system, and going from Asana to Notion was just a huge jump for us anyway. It
We
gave
went
us so
from
much more control.
we went to Monday from Asana, and then we moved from Monday to ClickUp. And I think it's Monday, Notion, ClickUp are all sort of the same generation of software. And well, I guess Monday is kind of a step behind, a half step generation back, but they're ahead of Asana. And seeing the difference in how the project management and task management and just knowledge management software has evolved is amazing.
I do hear good things about Airtable as well, but we had one client that asked me to use it and I found it painful
It
to
is.
go through.
So Airtable is super powerful. That's all I have to say on the subject.
It's so for anyone listening, depending on what stage you're at, it can feel complex, Airtable. I'll put it that way, and that's all I'll say about that. But these tools are awesome, and I do recommend that anyone that is in a process of flow that's generating leads, no matter what it is, the chances are you'll be able to pull using really simple tools, right, Michael, like Zapier, if this, then that. Get things that are coming in by email or things that are coming in from your website to then be automatically placed into a project management software like even Asana, Notion, ClickUp, or anything else. There's loads of easy wins that can take away stress for you and also create that knowledge base, like you mentioned, for your content, for your guests, for people that are messaging, client relationship management, all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, ClickUp has become our CRM, and that was a big shift. We did that because we were moving to so many guests and stuff. It was easier just to move it all into the same system. And because of the automations, it's now possible to have all the great functions we need in both tools.
I think that's, again, like for anyone listening, check out Zapier, check out if this, then that, get the basics, at least figure out the basics for yourself, connecting a couple of things, couple of tools that you use often, connect them together. Use things like Calendly. It's a great tool. I'm not paid to say this. Obviously, I pay Calendly to use their service instead. Massive thanks to Calendly for that, by the way, charging me so much money.
So do I.
Still worth it. But literally, like all of these little things, I'm amazed at how much now of my life is kind of like, cool, yeah, that's just happened. Like I get the
Oh,
email that just tells me I have a guest booked in. I'm like, that's sweet, result, I'm done.
well, you'll love this then. So brandmark.io
Brandmark.io. I'm intrigued.
is an automated logo generator. It's the best one I've seen. If you combine that with copy.ai, you're done. That's your podcast. That's the logo. That's the tagline, everything. Or your new business.
I played with copy.ai the other day and I was throwing in some ideas, funny enough, actually, for a client. I thought, here we go. Let's throw in some stuff, see what comes out of it. And honestly, I was impressed. Like we didn't necessarily use any of the headlines and stuff that it was pushing out, but I was like, this is, a few of it is completely off point, but some of the suggestions that it gives you are really on point. And you
Hey,
can see how that's going.
it's as good as a junior copywriter, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's just accessible, right? This is the nice thing. So if you're listening to this podcast, it's 10 o'clock at night, wherever you are, and you're looking for some ideas and stuff, check out, what was the other one? Brandmark?
Brandmark.io.
So brandmark.io and copy.ai. And actually you'll suddenly realize that you can get up and running. I wouldn't say perfection and finalized,
80/20.
but yeah, use your 80/20. That's done. Move on. I have seen people that are starting businesses that have spent months trying to get their branding on point. And as I keep trying to tell people, branding changes over time. No one cares. Facebook was the Facebook. The logo has changed, I don't know how many times. Instagram logo, every time it gets a refresh, people kick off for about 10 minutes and then they forget all about it. No one cares about that stuff, really. Just get yourself up and running, do the work, get the clients, make revenue. Then you can play with all these things.
Couldn't agree more. That's
Awesome. Sorry, go on,
that's my
Michael.
favorite thing. I was just going to say revenue. It's like
Yeah, absolutely.
my
Until
number
you've got
one.
So basically, this was we had this conversation recently with somebody else, and my commercial director is all for this as well. We'll talk to people and they'll be like that. No, we've got this idea. This is going to be huge. And I'm like that. All right, calm down. I've heard this before. I was like that. How many people are currently paying you for this idea? And invariably, it's the moment of, well, no one yet. We haven't launched. Those are that. Go find someone that will pay you for this idea. Validate this as quickly as possible, so as you don't waste your inheritance money, your mum and dad's savings, the friends and family VCs, any of these things. And literally, so that you don't waste 18 months of your life building, creating, thinking, strategizing, until you know that somebody's willing to go, here's 100. I want it. Or here's $5,000. I want it. No matter what the price point is, get somebody to buy it, and not a friend or family. Get a real customer to buy it.
That was, in fact, our first goal with Podcast 360 was have somebody buy it who we never speak with. That was the biggest shift we wanted to achieve with this rebrand of a particular service and the design. We got that just last week, and it took maybe 3 weeks because we planned, but it's a fantastic feeling.
It's a fantastic feeling, but right, if you had done that and tried, and you'd spoken to 10 people that you'd never spoken to before, and all of them said no.
We had 8 clients pre-sold before we even put up the web page.
There you go. That's what we're looking for, right? And this is where way too many people try and validate by spending 18 months building all their money and then go, crap, we need customers. And you go, no one wants it. Like, it's a really bad time to figure out and validate that no one wants it.
I have people call me with that problem all the time, and I tell them, you spent too much time building your company. You don't have time for podcasting anymore. Go do ads. You need returns next month? I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's exactly that. But it's the old agency thing is always, how can I get some quick wins? Well, you start 6 months ago. Simple.
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
no brainer.
Yeah, and we're not trying to be rude when we say it. You're not trying to be nasty to people when you say it, but it is a case of, finding revenue, generating sales. There is no quick magic button. There is no one size fits all. There is no magic click funnel formula that some person, let's be polite on today's episode.
I've got a guy named Russell who disagrees with you.
Get a guy called Russell. There you go. He'll give me does he have the formula for making millions of dollars whilst I sleep, even without knowing what my product is?
ClickFunnels.
Yeah. So ClickFunnels is one of those perfect examples where the software and as a tool, it's fantastic. People use it, they make it work for them and everything else. What you can't do is say, right, this funnel that worked for this guy selling PT coaching services online is going to work for my SaaS business if I set it up, and I'll make $1 million while I sleep overnight.
I wish.
Everyone wishes. But again, anyway, right, we're getting sidetracked. Michael, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm trying to keep it wrapped around the 40 something minutes. So I'm not too short, but we haven't quite made it to the 3-hour sessions yet.
Yeah. I mean, next time I can come back, we can talk about buying stuff instead of marketing, because that's my favorite way to market now.
Talk about buying stuff.
Yeah. So because I'm kind of out of the day-to-day with the audio business, I go shopping now and I look for little companies and other properties, and then we buy them. And because they already have audiences and payment, we can make money immediately just by adding them on to our existing operation. And, I'm not that great of a marketer. I'm really an operations guy who just ended up with a marketing company. It's a lot easier than marketing, it turns out.
So what sort of companies do you buy then?
So it's a combination of like little SaaS apps and directories, with where we're constantly pursuing podcast production and other digital services, where if we can bolt on podcasting and get a 30% or 40% revenue boost, we want to do that. Or if they've got an inefficient production operation, maybe your entire team for podcast production and blog writing is all based in the US. that's a giant red flag from a cost standpoint to me.
Yeah. Well, outsourcing and the beauty of everyone working from home potentially for a long time or forever, who knows?
I mean,
But
it's forever for me.
well, it's been forever for me since 2016. I haven't had an office, and I'm just like
Same.
that. Never going to go back to an office. But I do understand that there are a lot of people that are having troubles with it and have struggled, let's say, during these times, and I feel bad for them. But it's definitely opening up a world talent pool, which is very, very interesting. Like, we always had the freelancers and, bits and bobs everywhere, but actually what's going to stop, companies in the US from hiring somebody that's really good and that's working from home from Germany? Like,
Well,
there
we hire
shouldn't
in
be anything.
Africa and Eastern Europe.
Sorry?
We hire Africa and Eastern Europe.
Yeah. I mean, so those sort of networks have always existed, right? For the cheaper workforce and stuff like that, in terms of, especially for coders and stuff like that. I've got friends of mine who have built entire companies based out of the Ukraine for all their coding stuff. These guys
My
are,
first teams.
yeah, and these guys are machines, right? They're fantastic. But I think it's now even happening on a more global scale, in terms of, it's not necessarily just that, oh, I can save 20% on the salary. It can now actually be, this guy is the best at what he does, even if he's on the other side of the world. Who cares? We don't all meet in the office anymore. And that becomes a really interesting concept. But yeah, so cool. So basically, if anyone's working on a SaaS directory online product that's in any way, shape, or form connected, and you potentially think, you know what, I need to speak to Michael and I want to see if he'll buy my company, or potentially do some other kind of deal with him, where can people find you, Michael, to be able to make that conversation happen?
Yeah. Ooh, this is where I get to shout stuff out. So I guess I'll shout out. You can find me at callforcontent.com because that's the big one. That's what I'm supposed to be here to promote. That's callforcontent.com. But we exist at podcastscore.com, podcast360, and gentoftech.com or gentov.tech. And I'm also on Twitter, also gentoftech. That's GENTOFTECH. And I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me anywhere.
I'm going to make sure that we throw all those into the show notes. And if you're watching this on
Awesome.
YouTube, it'll be in the link below as well. All the links will be below, and we'll make sure it's everywhere so that people can find you and keep this conversation going. Michael, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully we'll get you back on the new long format version of this show or another show that we create to be able to keep talking and to get more in depth.
Yeah, deep talks with Chris.
I like it. I think it's got some traction. I might have to add in like a bottle of wine or something.
Hey, I would be drinking now if you told me it was required, and it's not 11 a.m. yet.
Perfect. You see, I'm onto a winner already. There's loads of people that want to come on the show, not even to talk, just to sit there with the bottle of wine.
I think that's everyone.
Michael, thank you very much. And we'll speak again soon.
Sounds good, Chris.